Here I am, another scrub with an opinion on the internet talking to a camera. And I could have wrote a paper, but papers suck, especially if you have raging ADHD like me and most of what I read goes in one eyeball and out the other. One thing I did to procrastinate this quarter was watch too much YouTube. I talk too much, that's my problem. The book is called Haben, the deafblind woman who conquered Harvard Law. It's a memoir written by Haben Girma that follows her adventures as a deafblind Eritrean American woman as she grows up, goes to college, travels both in the US and internationally, and goes to Harvard to be a disability rights lawyer. She's really badass. She is a prominent disability advocate and the first deafblind person to graduate from Harvard. I showed the book to somebody else and they were like, no, it was Helen Keller. Okay, Helen Keller didn't actually go there. Part 1. Don't go in my shirt, please. Disability solidarity. I made a lot of connections between this book and my personal experiences, like being a queer Asian person who went through most of life with an unsupported and unrecognized disability. Like Haben, my disabled experience is shaped by racialization. Reading Haben's memoir, it makes me feel like I know her, even though I don't actually know her. Like, our disabilities and situations are so different. I was one of those smart with behavior problems gifted kids that ends up angry and disillusioned with untreated mental illness and picks fights with teachers after they get bitched at for not paying attention in class. And I literally only went to school to do band and get away from my parents. Now I'm a neurodivergent burnout adult whose body has the structural integrity of a wet noodle. But there's so much I found in Haben's memoir that reflects my life. I could spend forever talking about all the specific examples, but that would take too long. So I'll summarize the shared themes. So a really common thing about being disabled, like I feel like it's universal, is we have to do so much stuff that regular people don't have to think about. Not necessarily because of the disability itself, but because everyone forgets we exist, and accessibility is an afterthought. There's so many hoops to jump through to get your needs met. There's gatekeeping. There's work ethic that you have to develop to keep up, because with disability, there's more effort that you put in and more exhaustion felt to get less out of it. And especially as a disabled person of color, there's tokenization, feeling like you have to be a spokesperson, you have to be the whatever, feeling othered among what should be community because you're so used to having to speak up for yourself, not belonging anywhere, being misrepresented, just having like nobody understand you. Haben says the need to advocate is ceaseless, even among family, even at a disability rights event. That's sad, but it's so true. Having to self-advocate and doing all the work of that just to get something you need. And there's the reality of getting accommodations and how they don't solve inaccessibility. Like accommodations, something simple is treated like it's such a big deal, it's unnecessary, it's difficult to make, so much of the time it's not completely accessible. Putting the burden of disability on the person with the impairment rather than the structure that's inaccessible or those with the power to change the structures and environments to be. Accessibility extends to the accommodation actually being put into practice in a way that shouldn't require more from the disabled person. Then there's the process of getting accommodations. It takes forever to get any in the first place. The isolation of disability. Internalizing ableism, internalizing that you're unwanted because you can't just be like everybody else. Feeling left out by inaccessible environments and disrespectful people, like not getting to be a person. You're not one of your peers. Like having to explain everything to people, but then you don't know if they'll get it and if they'll be respectful or if they're just gonna be an asshole. There's also always that awkward moment when the roommate you think is gonna be really cool turns out to be super ableist and not cool. I'm not gonna get into that story on my end. Okay, employment discrimination. That's another thing. The no one will hire me feeling that Haben talks about. She lives in California and then she goes all the way to Alaska for this job. And then they're like, no, you can't work there. And after that, she's looking for jobs and has a really hard time getting jobs. And she feels like no one will hire me. I've had that too, feeling like nobody will see you for who you are because you're disabled, you show signs of disability, or just like any indicator that you could have a problem or you could be a problem. Anything I decide to complain about, it would be even worse for her as a Black woman. Another thing that we have in common is becoming more disabled and having to adapt to it. Haben's first year at Harvard, but she realizes her hearing is going even more, and it's frustrating to her that her old ways of adapting don't work for her anymore. I felt that on some level. Like, I feel like I lose more ability to function and my body fails me more the farther I go in life. And it's really frustrating because it's harder to do the things that I used to. I know why, but it's still disappointing. She also writes about how she already has the blindness skills, like navigate the world being blind, but then adjusting to hearing loss feels more challenging. And that's also somewhat relatable, already being disabled, but wait, there's more. There's always more. It never ends. And then I had a traumatic brain injury, and then there was chronic pain and fatigue, and then now there's a whole pandemic that just never ends. It's a lot. I ask why my bones hurt, and then I'll like sit on top of my feet or just be like. So Haben's deafness and my ADHD are actually pretty similar in a lot of ways. She discusses how having a mental blueprint for English speech, sounds, and words, where she fills in the gaps in what she hears with these clues and suggestions. Sometimes I have to guess what someone said because I heard it, but it didn't register. The miscommunication is super obnoxious. There's so many times with miscommunication or frustration over there is so many times with miscommunication or frustration over communication, and it comes from assuming Haben can't understand because it wasn't loud enough, instead of being a problem of understanding or hearing what's being said. And it's a similar thing with missing things in conversations and miscommunicating because of auditory processing issues. It just doesn't register in my brain even though I hear it and I'm aware of them speaking, and then like with inattentiveness and all the lapses in focus that happen, even if I'm trying really hard to pay attention, and even then I still have to put in all this effort into actually focusing on the thing that's being said. There are times where the people she's around aren't aware of tactile communication, so they don't realize the message that they're sending. There's this time when she's at school in Eritrea, and this kid grabs her to get her attention, but ends up communicating something that feels harsh and urgent instead of casual. I have issues with this too. I have PTSD. People don't realize they could be unintentionally communicating something threatening with like an innocent touch. That oh my god, that sounds so bad. I mean, I have a script, but I can't stick to the script. Whenever I'm reading something, I keep going off book. That's why I did get parts when I was trying to do musicals as a kid, other than the fact that they always wanted the white girl to behave, but that's like also not the point. People just not being aware of tactile communication, touching from behind to get my attention, or using their hands to guide me away from something that I'm going to run into. I'm clumsy and run into everything, but then my brain interprets it as a threat, but like they don't know that. The lizard brain reacts first to protect me before the rational part kicks in. So how she describes spoken language and hearing overlapping conversations as a deaf person, tangled together like hair strands caught in gum. Try to pull a strand free and another strand gets caught. Feeling bored and lonely and frustrated because conversation isn't accessible. Like it's the same feeling when it's hard to get into a conversation because I can't process what's going on or pay attention to the conversation, and getting that isolation, frustration, like feeling left out and just loneliness. For Haben, when she spends time around her family, the mix of languages spoken at the same time makes it worse. And that's also true for me. It's also harder to understand something where there's multiple languages going on at the same time. English is my first language and Mandarin is my second, and I'm fluent in Mandarin, but when there's any kind of overlapping conversation, I don't understand anything. I just feel like I'm really inept. This is a little off topic, but not entirely. I love when dim sum places have those order papers and the menus with the pictures of the food. Oh, because when they're asking me what I want to order and they're telling me something, they could be saying it in English, they could be saying it in Mandarin, and I still couldn't understand them because there's background noise and I'm distracted. And I also can't read Chinese. Okay, it's not all complaining. First of all, she's funny. I think I'm funny. What doesn't kill you makes you entertaining. At the beginning of the memoir, she goes, unlike most memoirs, the stories here unfold in present tense. Hindsight may be 2020, but 2020 is not how I experience this ever-surprising world. Nothing like a good roast yourself joke to go along with the insights, right? Later, she goes all the way to Alaska to get this summer job, and she shows up, and the manager wants to see her. So she's worried about being in trouble because getting called to the manager, and he's like, you can't work here. And she's expecting him to follow it up with something ableist, and she asks him, are you telling me to leave because I'm blind? This guy deadass says, no, it's because you're from California. Okay, at least he's not ableist. The fact that they just messed up the paperwork, though, says something about the double standards. Non-disabled white cis male people can make thoughtless mistakes, but we people of color, disabled people, have to be excellent and perfect all the time. It's like there's only two kinds of person to be. The Make-A-Wish kid over here or Stephen Hawking. There's just nothing else in between. And that's a surprise tool that will help us later! Look at this baby. Look at this baby, look at this baby. His name is Eddie. I named him after the Stranger Things character because I'm a nerd. I like making people listen to me talk, and I like making people look at my rats. I also want to point out that Eddie, except he has like a little thingy here, but he's like a little tuxedo rat. He doesn't like that, he's not impressed. He's Robin, his brother, who I also named after Robin from Stranger Things. Robin looks like the printer just ran out of ink when it got to him. We are back from that quick little set change, and we're going to get critical. That was a terrible introduction, but I had to put the rats away because they were getting hungry without their dinner and they were being cranky. I'll start with the good news. I like starting with the good stuff. Butter people up and make them optimistic until I crush the world into a tiny, wrinkly used tissue ball. One of the ableist assumptions and narratives about disability is the pity narrative. It's exactly what it seems like it would mean, that disability is so strongly associated with destitution that people can't imagine a successful blind person. Haben's success pushes back against this narrative very strongly. Her life is proof against the misconception of disabled people not deserving of or being incapable of having autonomy and just living full lives. Misconception of disability just being a miserable and pitiful thing. One thing I really like about it is that it's a great example of taking control of your narrative. Disabled people can shape their own narrative. We can shape our own narratives. Counter to the usual trend of disabled narratives and lives being shown exclusively through an abled lens. It's a positive framing of disability and rejecting the ideas that disabled people are lesser, broken, incomplete, not deserving of respect, what have you. Part of this narrative, taking control of your narrative, is finding empowerment in and claiming disability for yourself. One of Haben's memories that really stands out to me is she's telling a story about when she's in Mali on a school trip where the high school kids go and help build schools. She gets her period, and she has to wash the clothes that she uses as pads. And while she's washing them, she runs into this man who's freaking out about her using this one specific bucket for who knows why. Like, she didn't want anyone to find out she's on her period. Now she's embarrassed. This guy's yelling at her, and she doesn't know why he's upset or what's wrong. But then she decides to show she is not ashamed. She looks up at this guy and goes, "It's biodegradable." She explains in the memoir as choosing to embrace rather than stigmatize periods, because they're a thing that happens to almost every woman, almost every cis woman. We can apply this to disability, because it's stigmatized in many cultures, but instead, why not embrace it? Because it's natural and it's going to happen to everybody if you get old. And I love the reclaiming your stigmatized thing about yourself. So a lot of good stuff going on out there. Like disability TikTok, people customizing their stuff. Like there's decorating their wheelchairs and canes with spikes and studs and things. And I know there's this one store that makes spike wheelchair handle covers to keep people from pushing them, because that's a problem of people like trying to push somebody's wheelchair. I know somebody who made cute little like decorative covers for their cochlear implants. I try to own the things that I've been through, and I try to own the things that are different about me, whether it's expressing them in my creative pursuits, like when I do art or music or writing, or whether it's just generally in life, like being open and honest. Another assumption about people who have an apparent disability, or one that's more easily noticeable, is presumed incompetence. Like assuming that somebody is incompetent because they're disabled. As soon as the person does something for themselves, they're overcoming their disability. It's viewed as, if this disabled person can do it, anyone with the right mindset can, or the only disability is a bad attitude. These types of stories are what we call inspiration porn. Why porn? Because disabled people are objectified. They're not human, they exist as an inspiration to others. They're not full people. They're there for somebody for somebody to get off their daily dose of feel good and sympathy boner. This type of ableist narrative doesn't just come from non-disabled people committing to showing how they're just like regular people with their amazing attitude and desire to succeed despite their disability, and showing that Haben's Memoir, on the other hand, it's not like that. It's an empowering and inspiring story by a disabled person for disabled people. It's inspirational, but not in the inspiration porn way. Call me a pessimist, but I don't really like inspiring stories. They feel like they're guilting me, or they're pushing me to be this some kind of girl boss idea that really just serves white, cis, heteropatriarchal capitalist standards. Not this one, though. It serves to remind me of my own ambition, like to own that for myself, not in a way of meeting some expectation, but empowering myself to follow my own dreams, and that I can be who I want to be and do what I want to do, and that there's other disabled people out there doing amazing, fun, fulfilling things and living their best lives and making a difference. Haben also reminds me of the assets of disability: disabled wisdom, resilience, survival, creativity, and joy. One of these is she tells a story of when she's in Mali on a school trip. She's building a well to build the toilet at this school, and how she integrates her experience and skill of salsa dancing into learning the movements needed to use the tools. And that's the same when I bring things I learned in marching band, drum corps. For those of you who have never heard of it, most people haven't heard of it. Basically in an intensive summer competitive league for extreme band nerds. I bring things I learned there, my experiences from that, into my everyday life to help me live with my disabilities, to help me get through things. Integrating something you pick up doing something else is such an artist thing and disabled thing, because you have to figure out so much on your own. And you learn to make everything work for you because it doesn't work for you. Going along with that, something important I take away from this is disabled joy. I forget about it. I get bogged down in misery. We have mental illness, fatigue, chronic pain. Some people lose an arm and a leg. Some lose function of their entire body. Some of them lose their entire bodies and have to get soul bonded into an armor suit. Some people lose their will to live. Reading this, though, was reminding me that there is joy in being disabled. And outside of the barriers and circumstances and institutional problems, the rest is what I make it. I'm the one who gives my life its meaning. I can make a difference. And this was empowering to light a fire under my ass and remind me of my passions, that I can pursue them, and my life is for me to live. But as every action must have an equal and opposite reaction, every point must also have a counterpoint. Here's the complicated thing of it being a disabled success story. Haben is an exception. This narrative reveals an ugly truth about the world. We have to prove ourselves. So much of this damn book is her proving herself. It's not right always feeling like you need to prove yourself. There's a moment when Haben talks about that, where she's in family with Eritrea, helping with the meal with the rest of the kids. Some boys They give her a bull penis to cut up while, preparing the dinner because she can't see it and they want to mess with her. They think it'll be funny. And she does it anyways, as dignified as taking a kitchen knife to a flaccid dead dick can be. But it's isolating for her, she says. By focusing my energy on proving my fearlessness, framing the situation as me against them, I perpetuated and guaranteed my own exclusion. I appreciate that part. Being tough instead of asking for help and connecting, it's something that happens so often, and a thing people learn to do when they internalize from an early age that they're burdensome, they're extra work, they're too much and not enough at the same time. But then once you cave and take that first leap of admitting you can't do it all yourself, all of a sudden you're not trying hard enough, lazy, incompetent, don't want to think for yourself, what have you. There's no way to win here. While one aspect of ableism is presuming incompetence and having lower expectations for disabled people and many other marginalized groups, at the same time, another part of ableism is that there's a double standard of achievement and higher expectations in order to be respected. The double standard is inseparable from the accomplishments and the feel-goods in Haben's story. For her trip to Mali, she's the one putting in work that nobody else does. She puts more effort into being prepared and feeling like because she can't hear or see as well, she has more to lose if she doesn't do everything right in regards to being useful for the team. I wish I didn't feel that, but I do. Like where you know that you're going to be burdensome because you can't do something or because you do it differently or you have a need that other people don't, so then you overcompensate to not feel bad about not contributing, and it's just why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do this? And we shouldn't have to work harder than other people to feel equally important. But also, why should we have to be extra useful or put in extra effort to be valued? Why can't people be okay with everyone contributing what they can, and then we as disabled people don't have to feel like we have to do more or feel like we're dragging everyone else down? She makes it to Harvard. Amazing. My parents would love that if I did that. I'm never going to do that. She goes to a lawyer's workshop and starts using a braille computer to talk to people. But she's in what she describes as the confounding position of being both ultra-visible and invisible. Knowing that people will judge and avoid her, assuming that she has no valuable contributions, and in response to that, she can't control their actions, but can control the messages that she sends. I'm happy for her that she finds power in doing this. But is it liberation? Is it empowerment? I don't think so. It seems powerful, but really it becomes her responsibility to make herself a certain way to others because they will not respect her. All it takes is to have some respect, have some humanity, to pull your head out of your ass a fraction of an inch. It's not her fault to feel the need to take the high road. To just no choices are made in a vacuum, and the stakes are infinitely higher for the most marginalized of us. But focusing only on how one reacts rather than how these racism and ableism-soaked standards of respectability are so ingrained, it puts the blame in the wrong place. In a social situation export of this medicalized idea that disability is deficit and that it's the disabled person's responsibility to change for abled society. Nothing's new. Nothing's shocking. It's the same 3 kids in a trench coat pretending to be an adult. The pressures of ableism are all too familiar. Making sure you're not a waste of space, taking resources away from people who deserve it more, misrepresenting yourself and your people, that you're not slovenly, opportunistic, and willful, shifty and underhanded, trying to squeeze as much out of others as you can, always looking to get something from somebody. A good disabled person. A respectable minority. The pressure to be grateful for the bare minimum of respect. Quiet and apolitical. Not demanding. Doesn't stir the pot. Is this familiar? It's definitely familiar. It's almost like it's the model minority standard in less overtly racist packaging. I grew up being told I'm demanding and difficult and ungrateful. I feel like I'm too much and not enough at the same time. So, Haben feeling like her lack of fluency in ASL makes her a difficult deaf person is one thing that I find solidarity in. But if not for the expectation to be overwhelmingly grateful for getting any consideration at all, to be happy for handouts, would she? Would I? Feeling like you should be perfectly adapted to your disability and that you're being difficult whenever your needs aren't fully met by the existing accommodation? It's the expectation by abled white society to be compliant and not complain that does it. Once again, with the similar oppression between Haben as a disabled black woman and myself as a disabled Asian person, is her specifically going to Harvard Law because being disabled, she will suffer employment discrimination. Going to the highest ranked school will hopefully bypass that and give her the most access to employment. It's drilled into a lot of East Asian people in the United States that in order to be equal and to be respected both by peers and in society, you have to be the best at everything. Straight A's for life, win piano competitions, be a star athlete, get a near perfect SAT, never get in trouble for misbehaving in class, go to a top ranked university. Blah, blah, blah. That was particularly harmful for me. Mediocrity is not an option in this society for a black woman, neither is it for Asians. To be mediocre, just acceptable and normal for white people. Clearly, I could never understand what it's like to be a disabled black woman. I will never have the experience of being black by nature of my existence. And I don't know what it's like to be deafblind yet. Let's check back on that in 60 years. But white people and able people don't need to prove themselves as much or be as respectable. They warn to advise against internalizing the hierarchy of sight. The blind person with no residual vision defers to the one with some vision who defers to the one with full vision in one eye because ultimately they're closer to being fully sighted. Classifying and ranking blind people by amount of residual vision divides the community. This pattern shows up in other marginalized groups where privilege comes from proximity to the group in power. How well you can imitate the man. Haben doesn't want a world where the one-eyed man is king of the blind. Yet there he is, unchallenged on the throne. The strain of excellence is still oppression. It becomes a demand or requirement, rather than an option or an achievement. The expectation that you are the epitome of excellence or striving to be it, or you're actively putting an effort to be closer to the white abled standard. The main issue I have with this book is it reinforces the supercrip versus pity narrative dichotomy. Summarizing it, the supercrip narrative is like the disabled person who overcomes everything. If disabled people aren't assumed to be incompetent and pathetic or just lazy and shouldn't exist, the other representation that is just as problematic, they're working extra hard to overcome the disability. They don't allow it to get in their way. They don't give in to it. It's possible to read this book as a form of the supercrip narrative. The feel-good stories, the way disability is an obstacle to surmount through willpower and determination. It's almost saying the negative societal effects of ableism, no, not the disability itself, can be overcome with hard work and that the ultimate goal is independence. In portraying disability this way, the narrative doesn't align with these certain parts of disability justice. Recognizing wholeness, that people are inherently worthy regardless of how productive they can be and what service they can give. Sustainability, pacing yourself to sustain energy and momentum long term. How can anyone keep up with these expectations of production and maintain the standard of achievement on their own when their disabilities affect how much they're able to do more than the way things are done? I'm one of those people. What about the role of Western ways not following disability justice? Rather than what's missing from the person, what's missing from society? access to support that not everyone has, the end of capitalism, having basic needs met as a human right instead of having to exchange labor you have limited capacity for. It's hard to advocate for disability justice and survive with the limitations of your own impairment on top of the ways the world as it's built makes people inherently not enough, unless there's a society with more interdependence, more connection, and treating people as inherently worthy. What a concept. Just letting people be people. Not everyone can do what she does. My former gifted kid, chronic pain and fatigue ass can't. I struggle to take care of myself, and I never feel rested because the demand of Western capitalist society and its overemphasis on self-reliance and the isolation of the capitalist death march that's even worse with never having enough in you to do everything you need. I would love to make as big of an impact as Haben, but I'm not pursuing a career as a therapist anymore. I was going to do that originally. I'm a psych major. That's why I went to school. I'm not doing that anymore because the amount of school I'd have to go to, it's not worth the toll on my mental health. It's just inaccessible for me by nature. I would love to be a proficient musician with a huge body of work, but I can barely do the things I have to as is. My needs have gone unmet for so long that I feel like I'm only getting by, let alone engage with the things that bring me joy and fulfillment. I don't have the community or support I need in order to follow my calling as a person, as a community member, as an artist. By putting conventional success on a pedestal without exposing the personal cost and the pain of that path, by not addressing how so many disabled people can't do the things we set our minds to, no matter how much we're told we can do anything as long as we try hard enough. By ignoring the fact that our impairments actually impair us and how the nature of our existence gets so that we need more from everyone else that they can give with nothing in return. What is the fucking point? What's the fucking point? We're not normalizing justice, but normalizing the model minority as it applies to disability. It feels like this isn't a story for everyone. What about the rest of us losers? What do we have other than the voices of ignorant observers and the nagging in the back of our head that says, if this disabled person can do this, why can't you? We're already working overtime here, living with these body, mind, goop things in a world that isn't made for us because, let's be real, disability is like the worst job ever. It's full-time, but you don't get paid overtime. No vacation, no paid lunches. You don't get to have the state-mandated however many hours between your closing shift and opening shift. The company owns your soul. The manager's an asshole. The benefits are jack shit, and what does it pay? Nothing. We need more stories of everyday disabled people. Being disabled is messy and exhausting, and it sucks. Visibility shouldn't only be the good things and the success stories. Visibility should be how it is, warts and all. We need more stories told by fellow disabled people about average disabled people, mediocre disabled people. We are a multitude, and having the only narratives exist in a dichotomy between the extremes is still oppressive. No disabled person should have to be outstanding and inspirational as the rent they have to pay to exist. The cost of being a person keeps going up. Giving them blood, gallons of the stuff, give them all that they can drink, and it will never be enough. We shouldn't have to be better than everyone else and show how we overcame the circumstances to get to be people. And yes, this is both with disability and racialization. Sure, the model minority standard is such a significant part of the oppression I've experienced. It hits harder for me because it's ableist in nature. Racism and ableism are woven together in a way that they can't be separated from each other until they become each other and synergize. They compound each other's detriments in that the resulting poison is more potent than the isolated ingredients simply added together. I did my time and I want it. That doesn't make this book a bad book or a misinterpretation. This story wasn't intended to reinforce ableism, but in pushing back on some aspects of ableism, there is the potential for it to be interpreted as a reinforcement. I'd say there's a duality to it, where it is and it isn't at the same time. Things conflict and converge simultaneously. It's a both and kind of thing rather than either or. At its worst and at the same time at its best, this narrative is a double-edged sword. Thank you for watching. If you got all the way through to the end, I talk too much. That's my problem. When I was a kid, they used to call me Yap Yap because I wouldn't shut up. If you didn't, there is a transcript available. I just lost my train of thought. I don't know where I was going with this.